Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. Welcome to the third episode of the Industry Podcast, an esports insider podcast looking at the people and personalities in and around the esports space. I'm your host, Kerry, and today I have got Alex Neal, Managing Director of Mighty Jaxx, a Singapore-based designer toys and art collectible studio and online store. How you doing today, Alex?
Hey, Kerry, great to meet you.
Great.
How are things?
Yeah, I'm doing well. I have some nice weather here in Amsterdam. How's the weather? Where are you at? London?
Yeah, I'm in London. Unfortunately, it's reverted to classic London type, so tipping down with rain as we speak. And so, if you can hear that in the background, apologies.
It's just got to add ambiance, in my opinion.
Good
Alex,
stuff.
how about you? How about you tell me a little bit about Mighty Jaxx and a little bit about yourself as well?
Sure, no problem. So I'm actually relatively new to Mighty Jaxx. I just joined in January. Prior to that, I'd been working in first off publishing, so in this kind of strange world of like collectible publishing that you have here in Europe. That's still a fairly big industry. It's probably still worth around $1 billion a year in terms of sales. And I've been in that industry for a long time. So started off, yeah, as I say, in publishing, and then it moved much more towards the collectible and particularly entertainment collectible space over the time that I was there. So I was working with the likes of Marvel and DC and other entertainment studios, Universal, Paramount, for quite a while, and I was heading up effectively two of the three divisions in a company called Eagle Moss. I stayed there for around 16 years, all up, and that included a stint in Russia. So I was in Moscow, in Russia for 3 years, and also had the pleasure of working across many other countries during that time, including a fair bit in the States, and also in Latin America. So I was doing that for a considerable amount of time, really growing that direct consumer business, particularly across licensed collectibles. We became probably the most established, biggest player in the direct consumer side of the business, where we had our own e-shop and our own sort of big subscription database that we were pushing monthly subscriptions to. So that was basically going on until midway through last year, and then I realized that actually I needed to try something else. So at that point, I started looking around to see what other kind of interesting projects were on the horizon, and it came about almost by chance. But I'd seen that Mighty Jaxx be actually using a manufacturer that was common with the previous company I was at, and so it also been on Jackson's profile, who's the CEO and the founder of the company. Just reached out to him and said, "Hey, I see you're looking for people. Fancy a chat?" And didn't hear anything for a couple of weeks, and then just got a message back saying, "Hey, it'd be great to talk." We had one really good conversation in which he listened to what I'd been doing, my experience, and maybe how I could potentially help the company in the future. And then a second conversation in which he really pitched, I would say, the business and the vision that he had for the company to me. And off the back of that, I mean, it's a bit of a cliche to say, but I was unbelievably excited and enthusiastic about what's in store for Mighty Jaxx. I didn't know too much about it up until that point, but I think it's fair to say it's got a huge amount of potential.
So, what did Jaxx tell you that got you so excited and sort of in his vision for the company?
I mean, Jackson himself he's a very sort of humble guy, but he's clearly very sort of driven and passionate about what he does. So the look and feel of the products that Mighty Jaxx produces is different to the vast majority of collectibles you've seen. So I think that in itself was interesting. But more than that, I think it was the idea of tying together the physical and the digital elements, and the fact that this could be done in a way that it could either be physical to digital, or the other way around, that you were coming up with digital properties that then you could create in physical form, or a blend of the two, which enabled fans and customers alike to really engage with collectibles in a way that I hadn't seen in the industry. So to me, that was like incredibly exciting because it felt like someone had a vision of how this could be done, and that it really worked well with the brand and the messaging that he was trying to establish.
Yeah, I mean, what I think is super interesting and how what when I was first looking into Mighty Jaxx, and looking at like what and trying to imagine what a phygital collectible could be, I immediately sort of thought about Nintendo's Amiibos. If you saw those were like collectibles of like iconic Nintendo characters, and sometimes they would tie them with a release. And if you were the owner of an amiibo, then it would unlock something additional in game, in the Nintendo game. And I think that's the only type of thing I've really seen like that, at least in the video game industry. Maybe you know a little bit better than I do, if there has been more, other than I've seen you guys have a collectible with Tiny Tina from Borderlands. Were you involved in that one, or was that one in the pipes already before you joined?
Yeah, that was already well underway by the time I joined. I mean, that was one that they were talking about as an example of some of the things that could be done. But I think you're right. That kind of idea of having almost a game key within the physical collectible itself, um, was, had maybe been done before, but for us, this was like a big step in the direction that we were heading. And really only, I would say, the tip of the iceberg, because the idea for the business generally is to tie all these things together much more. Obviously, NFTs and the metaverse is very much buzzwords of today. But we've certainly got some like pretty ambitious plans in this area of how these things can all tie up, and done in a way that we think really adds value to what fans are looking for.
I don't know if you have any other plans for with like, I mean, you mentioned NFTs and such, and I know that one of your collectibles was tied to an NFT. I think it was to the moon cat or something like that, a meme.
Yeah,
A meme
Doge to the
turned
moon. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, a meme turned into a digital collectible, turned into an NFT. How internet can we get? um, but I mean, that's sort of like what's interesting about NFTs is that it was turning collectibles into a digital first, and in a lot of cases only, experience. Whereas what Mighty Jaxx is trying to do is pull things from not only digital but imagination, and then turning those into a sort of, yeah, turnkey that then unlocks another digital experience, and it creates this really interesting feedback loop. And so what I've seen with, especially with esports orgs, is they've been able to do this in a very interesting way. So they are physical people that compete in a digital game, but then they also, a lot of them are really pretty prolific in selling physical merch that their fans can then buy and then wear to attend physical events while these players are playing digital games. So it's this really, it's sort of hybrid, actually like very phygital, I guess, fandom in a
yeah.
different way than sports is, because sports is, purely physical, but you can watch it on TV as well. So I'm just curious to hear your perspective of where you think this sort of idea, like this passion behind Mighty Jaxx, falls within the esports industry.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know specifically, esports, but I think sports and esports alike, we recognize that there's a lot of people who have a lot of passions out there, and right now these aren't necessarily always best served by some of the collectibles and consumer products that are out in the market. So, as well as obviously all of the kind of logo slap type products that you get, there's a lot of things at the kind of lower end of the market that maybe aren't really appealing to some of the things that fans are actually looking for. And so our perspective is being able to serve that market by having something that we think fits within that niche, and gives people something that we hope adds extra value, and over time is seen as something that appreciates in value, much in the way as you've seen with older comic books or collectibles of that kind of era. Um, so this is one way that we can do it. I think, as you were saying, the kind of extended experience that exists within our products and the way that we try to push that is something that we're looking to really expand. And I think at the moment we're not doing anything with any kind of esports companies per se, but it's certainly in our roadmap and our kind of eye line that this is an area that's super interesting for us, and that we're keen to sort of to get involved and to see how we can collaborate with people in that space too.
Yeah, and I've seen that you guys have the Mighty All Stars line, which is more tied to traditional sports, and yeah, that sort of reminds me a bit of like the bobblehead phenomenon that was what was that, 80s, 90s or something, into the
Yeah.
2000s. I'm sure they're still around, but this was a big thing, and there's many companies that have expanded on this and are doing more artistic versions of this. But I remember growing up in the 90s that the quarterback of every NFL team had a bobblehead that you could buy, and it was like a way to, like a way to give something back to the fans, that you could, sort of express your fandom and also remind you of this thing you're super passionate about every day. So I definitely can see. I mean, the line is there, right?
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah, I mean, for us, as I say, it was a way to look at collectibles, particularly for sports, in a kind of different perspective. So if we take something like Formula One, you can find collectibles out there, but you couldn't really find too much in our kind of price point or anything in our kind of quality or style, and certainly not with the ambition to be able to say cover all of the drivers in such detail. So to give you an idea, then within our 2021 range, we had a number of collections, including all 20 of the drivers in like 8-inch form. We then had a bronze version that you could buy for like the princely sum of $1,200. Um, but the thing is absolutely incredible. I saw samples when I was out in Singapore recently, and it shows the kind of depth of collectible that Mighty Jaxx is able to actually bring to the market. And I think that appeals beyond, the kind of widest or mass appeal. It's really going into the kind of fandom space to say, okay, this is truly, unique. There's only going to be a limited number of these made. And how can we prove it? Well, actually, all of our products come with NFC chips within them. So upon purchase, you're able to, once you've bought the product, you've received it, you open your Mighty Jaxx app and you scan your product. It then appears in your digital vault. You've got that forever. It's got your within the blockchain. It's tracking obviously which unique product you have. Much in the same way in the past you'd have had a certificate of authenticity as a paper version of that. Now you've actually got a digital record of all of that as well. So we're looking, within that, how do you then build extra content that appears through buying that product? Now, I'm not going to lie, sometimes that's easier said than done, because with certain licensors, there's certain information that's available, there's certain content that they make available to us. But with some already, we've been able to have things, for instance, with something like Sesame Street, we've had gamification. So simple gameplay that when you download, you scan your product, it appears in the game. You're able to kind of play games against other people, compete against other people, monthly competition prizes, money can't buy type opportunities, I would say.
Yeah, and I think especially with, I don't want to call it contemporary NFT culture, but I'm going to call it contemporary NFT culture, where people are demanding more and more utility, right? They don't just want a JPEG. They're looking for, what does this do for me? And I think that's sort of what Mighty Jaxx products and services are, is that this is not just a figurine. This is something that unlocks something else for you that you can also share in other ways and other aspects of your life. I mean, I think that's a great example you're saying with having a gamification, that you have this thing and then you're going to play it with other collectible owners as well, and that creates a unique little sense of community. I mean, besides your work with Gearbox and with the Tiny Tina product, do you see Mighty Jaxx working with more game developers? And I mean, more specifically to this podcast, like esports podcasters, because it's one thing that's interesting about esports is the media rights aspect of it. It's always said that nobody owns football. People own the rights to broadcast it and show it and all of these things. But in esports, the publishers and developers, they own the rights to the game, so they get to decide what gets done with their IP. And so while I mean collectibles for athletes or influencers, creators, this type of thing is one side of the story. Other side of the story is creating collectibles based on in-game items or specific potential collaborations between orgs that have their skins in the game that now they have an item or something like this. So that was a long-winded question, but to go back to the base of it, do you see Mighty Jaxx working more with game developers?
Absolutely. I think, Tiny Tina was our kind of first dipping of the toe in the water, so to speak. And it's very much in the roadmap to kind of identify partners and to look for potential partners to working with in this space. One of the really interesting things I found about Mighty Jaxx is the variety of collaborations that we're able to offer. So we've been able to work with, as well as the entertainment brands that I've kind of mentioned before, and some of the game companies, but also working with artists. We're working with plenty of other organizations who are producing products for different reasons. So we're not necessarily just working in the standard ways for consumer products in terms of licensed product or anything else like that. We're coming up with our own IP and our own ways to sort of bridge that gap. And that means that we can be super flexible, so that when we're talking to some of these people that you mentioned, we can actually offer a full suite of options depending on what actually fits in with their roadmap. So that can be, right across the board in terms of the physical product we're able to produce in terms of collectibles, but also potentially, with other digital forms too. And that's something we're actively working on. So actually, in the next couple of weeks, I'll be heading out to Vegas for the licensing show, and part of my remit for that show is actually to talk to as many people as I can in that space to make sure we're identifying that talent in that area to see how we can expand our portfolio essentially.
Yeah, one of the products that I saw that I think was super interesting was your collaboration with your shipping partner DHL. And so you created a whole line in this collaboration. And the thing that I thought was super interesting was the T-shirt, because a T-shirt, by pure function, has utility that you can wear it. And that was different than your figurines that you create. But I'm assuming that there's also still an authentication process and an extended experience in some facet attached to that. Maybe it's the digital version of the T-shirt that eventually maybe you'll be able to wear in whatever metaverse situation we end up in. But can you maybe talk a little bit about that sort of aspect of Mighty Jaxx, of not just necessarily creating collectibles with your artists, but these other unique items as well?
Sure. So, I mean, we have an in-house like business development labs team who are kind of looking at these collaborations all the time. So, I mentioned earlier that I was fortunate enough to visit the Singapore office in the last month. And whilst I was there, for instance, we had our own NFT and whiskey launch. So something completely off out of the comfort zone, so to speak. But it was something that was very well attended from a media event perspective. It just gets us out there again that we can actually cover so many different areas and that we're able to work across so many different product types. So the collaboration with DHL that you mentioned is similar, being able to extend the services we offer with a key partner in that case, to kind of broaden the overall sort of brand reach, and to do something in that way. We have quite a few other examples like that where we have collaborations with the likes of Adidas. We've done things with Foot Locker in the past. We've even done a kind of dissected version of a car for like a Chinese car show last year that we created, in our same style that we've had for a lot of our collectibles. So we were able to kind of roll with the punches in that sense and really turn our attention to a lot of different areas. Merchandise is one, so some of the things I mentioned earlier will be hitting the stores this year, for instance. And we're always open to working with people in the pop culture space, be it artists, be it other brands, be it retailers. And in that case, that was with a distribution partner, to give you an idea.
Some of the properties that you've mentioned, and a few that you haven't, that I had a look on the website, is you have worked with massive ones with Mighty Jaxx, such as SpongeBob SquarePants, One Piece, the anime, My Little Pony. How's that process been in your experience, or from what you've been able to tell, and also because of your years working with franchising? Franchising is, or sorry, not necessarily franchising, but licensing has become more and more commonplace in with crossovers into video games and the esports industry. Recently, we saw 100 Thieves with their collaboration with Attack on Titan. So they released a cool clothing range, and then they're also their partners in High Ground created a really cool keyboard collectible as well. I'm sure that there's so many moving pieces involved in getting this type of licensing across the line. So I'm just super fascinated to hear from your perspective how these things go from start to finish.
I think, for me, even coming on board, fairly recently, it's been really interesting to see the way that Mighty Jaxx approaches this, because, for instance, the collaborations you mentioned with Hasbro on like My Little Pony or SpongeBob on the Viacom side, some of the approaches in terms of product is quite out there for those type of products. So this dissected style, and showing a half cut open My Little Pony. So actually, sorry, grab one just to give you an idea. But this kind of approach is, I'm slightly surprised in some ways that the licensors have been so keen to see it. But in that sense, it's also because it shows ambition, it shows the brand in a different light. And it means that we're able to bring collectibles to the market that are, is saying for My Little Pony, it's not just all about targeting products for 7-year-old girls, that there are actually, this much wider fan base out there, and we're able to come up with concepts that we think are going to appeal to a wider base. So we have, for instance, My Little Pony products that sell for upwards of $200. So we have some pretty high end statues in that space, which is different from a lot of things that other collectible companies would maybe even consider as an approach. And similarly, with SpongeBob, there's a huge range of collectibles we've done. It's done incredibly well as a blind box series. There's been kind of ambitious products that kind of split in the middle and things like that. So pretty cool stuff. And so on the licensing side, full credit to the team to actually get that type of project on board. But once you have done, then obviously you've got pretty compelling evidence when you're talking to other people that you can pull this off. It's not just a concept, that you've got proven traction in the market. And I think something like One Piece is, again, a really interesting one, because it's an anime property. It's got a huge fan base. I believe it's the best selling manga of all time. So it's been going for like 25 years. And here in Europe, there's a massive following for it, particularly in continental Europe, in France, Germany, Italy, Spain. Big market for it. And for us, we've not had the rights to be able to sell something like that in Europe so far. So this product has done incredibly well in the States. It's done really well initially in Southeast Asia, and then in China. And we've seen a huge interest in this collection from elsewhere. And so we're hopeful to be able to roll this out into Europe shortly.
Can you talk a little bit about that, what you were just touching on with like the regional licensing? Because I think that that's actually pretty interesting, and that's a big part of esports. Media rights is getting the media rights per region, and that goes to different parties, and sometimes it's not available. So I'm really interested to hear from that on a licensing side in your experience.
Yeah, I think again this depends a little bit on the property, but I think for Mighty Jaxx up until this point, because there was no European entity, the focus in terms of the growth of sales has really come about through Southeast Asia, where the company is located, and then in the States, just being the biggest market for pop culture product generally. But there was certainly, I think they saw a gap, and I can certainly see a big gap that we can fill by operating here and being closer to the market. So some of that meant that being able to kind of extend licensing deals. So, for instance, to start with, it may be with certain properties that you're only able to get rights for certain territories, almost kind of prove that you can deliver on your promise for those territories before you then expand into other areas, because each licensing team would typically have its own targets and their own partners. And if you've got someone coming in from a different market, then you really need a good story and a good track record to be able to get that across the line. Other properties you're able to get global rights for almost from the get-go, and that obviously makes life easier in terms of rolling the product out. But something like anime is a really complicated one, because even the rights revert to different partners in different regions, and also depending on which series, whether it's a manga, whether it's some sort of animation or anything else. So it really kind of depends on the property, I would say. Something like F1, we have an exclusive deal in that space, not for collectibles per se, but in the size and the format that we're going for, which means that we're unique in that sense and able to operate globally for a fan base that is typically pretty widespread, because you've got races in so many different countries, very well attended, huge amount of interest that's been driven by other kind of pop culture events, so Netflix series, things like that. They've kind of really seen a explosion of interest. Something like the Miami Grand Prix this weekend, for instance, you saw again. There was an announcement of a crypto partner. There was an NFT launch for F1 themselves off the back of that. So you can see these areas starting to merge and sort of blend between the physical and digital again, and we're very much keen to be at the forefront of all of that.
So what's interesting also about NFTs, and you just brought this up, and I just thought about it, is like the speed in which a collectible can be made, right? How quickly you can just create something in your computer and then put it on the internet and then mint it. It is then available, and so that is definitely something that physical products don't quite yet have. I mean, we have amazing 3D printer technology that can create something out of nothing very, very quickly. But if we're talking at scale, and also with having these how do you say that word? Authentifis. Will you say it for me? Authenticate. Yeah, it's way easier to say it that way. Authenticated chips. Yeah, this is all. I mean, we're in such a time in our lives that our reliance on microchips is affecting a lot of the world around us. But given your experience and knowing how things are potentially going, because you're so deep in this, how do you think that collectibles are going to be able to, or like physical collectibles, phygital actually, to be most accurate, are going to be able to compete with these purely digital ones that also can open up a lot of different doors in the digital world?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I mean, it's one that we're certainly trying to contend with almost every day. I mean, there's a new kind of you know NFT launch. There's a new kind of metaverse launched almost every day at the moment. Everyone's got their own take on what's going to happen, and we're no different. We're working on plans in that space for sure. But I guess one of the key things for us is being able to serve different types of product. And from a materials point of view, I've never seen a company as diverse as Mighty Jaxx in the collectible space. Producing products from $10 to 15,000. It's a huge extreme sort of base, and I think within those realms, depending on the fandom, the price point you're trying to hit, the number of people who are active in that fandom and are willing to buy into collectibles or looking for something that extends their relationship with, you know be it esports or be it with another kind of activity. Um, I think the technology on the product side is also advancing. It's less quickly, clearly, than the NFT sort of race. But I think in that space, there's going to be some pretty big innovations shortly that are going to bridge that gap from what you're saying in terms of 3D printing to being able to offer something, truly unique for fans, whether that's, a product that's kind of adapted just for them, if you can imagine avatars and things like that. And it's interesting, the likes of Fortnite, where they've been able to do so much around in-game purchasing and, really make a small fortune, obviously, or a large fortune on doing that type of thing. Is how do they then take the next step to be able to, really tie into adding something physical to that for those people who are interested in that. Of course, there's some people who aren't. Their whole experience and our interaction is purely digital, and that's fine. For us, it's if that's the case, then how do we add in other digital experiences that maybe aren't just purely on the collectible side?
Right. And what what that just reminded me of is like I remember when my favorite video games would put something out into the real world. So a lot of times it'd be like, I mean, not just necessarily merchandise, but there would be a book written in the universe or whatever like this. And there's a product that I could buy that I could have. And also would always have really great artwork and these types of things. So they were, have been able to sort of find ways as game studios to put this IP into a like physical artifact. And then yeah, every time you see that, that's going to remind you about this. It's this sort of like phenomenon of physical objects is that they also store memories that you or somebody else has, and that's why I think mementos are important, and also um, like medals of achievement. Also, every time you see a gold medal, you're going to remember when you won that medal or have a story around that. So my next question was, how do you see potentially, digital collectibles working into, like, let's say for instance you attend an event and you get an attendance token or something like that, or I mean it could even just be a sheet of paper or something, but obviously Mighty Jaxx is into doing really cool things with your in-house team, so printing a piece of paper would be rather boring.
Yeah, I mean, actually, the company is already fairly advanced in some of those spaces. So, for instance, at Comic Cons or at Designer Con, being able to do NFT launches specifically for that event, and then people who buy into that NFT at the event or around the event are then given the option to be able to buy physical product, for instance. And my personal view on that is, in doing so, we're conditioned, obviously, as people to associate physical with value. So in some ways, this offers some reassurance to people that actually it's not all emperor's new clothes kind of approach. That actually there's intrinsic value in the digital side, but actually on the physical side as well, you've got something to put on your shelf to look at if that's your thing. And clearly, I think for a lot of the games companies, one of the things they've realized is that um, whilst they can make enormous sums of money from in-game purchasing and various other things in that space, obviously merchandise and other things start to come into play too. But actually, licensing isn't necessarily about printing lots of money, because they can find ways to make money in a much easier way than dealing with approvals and physical samples and all this sort of stuff. It's, as you say, it's how do you create a memento? How do you tie it back to the feeling of when you first played a game, or whether that's a collectible, uh, you know old school games like Sonic or Mario. People still buy everything you can possibly think of in terms of collectibles because it reminds them, it's got a nostalgic view to it, and they've been able to tap into that. Funko have done that incredibly well. Obviously, across the pop culture space, they've led the market in that space, um, and been able to really tie into that nostalgic view on brands, that other people in the past wouldn't have gone near because they wouldn't have been able to reach the audiences. But by going across in that way, they've been able to essentially create a pop culture phenomenon, or a Funko fan, if you like, And I think it's going to be interesting to see what the next steps are in this space.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, sort of the most well cited, I would say, NFT project is the Bored Ape Yacht Club, because they have been able to create this IP and then expand it. And, with the concept of the NFT is that you own sort of the IP for that specific NFT, and then you're able to use that to do whatever you want with it or whatever. And you were mentioning that with Mighty Jaxx, that you guys have also created your own IP in a lot of ways, that you're able to create like not only collectibles with, but potentially work with crossovers, right? So I'm curious, when you're talking about the sort of the skeleton, the X-ray ones, was that a concept that Mighty Jaxx came up with, and is that sort of part of this IP that you're chatting about, or is that just was an idea that started somewhere and then you guys kept going with it?
So I think that particular idea, I mean, so Mighty Jaxx has partnered with US designer called Jason Freeney, um, and he has kind of been at the forefront of that design. I don't know exactly where it came from, the idea in terms of the collaboration, but certainly he's been a guy we've been working with for some time in that space to get that real look and feel. And that product's gone from collectibles then to things like some of the collaborations I mentioned earlier with clothing companies. So it's kind of extended beyond the core initial product, so to say. I think in terms of our next steps in the kind of meta space and like extended experiences and things, then we have big plans coming. It's still very much in the roadmap right now, so we're not quite at the stage where we're ready to announce exactly what's going on. But having sort of seen the team, met the guys who are working on this project back at HQ, is super exciting. And I think people in this space who are interested in collectibles, pop culture, esports, is going to be one to watch, because I think there's so much potential coming, and it's really geared around the fact that we're trying to create something that does extend that fan experience, and the way that fans are able to interact with brands, or with our own artists and things like that, as opposed to money grab. How quickly can we kind of sign off on a huge sum and then not really deliver any utility, as you say, uh, in in the product we actually deliver.
Yeah, and with brands in the esports space, or brands activating into the esports space and gaming space too, I think, as you were talking about at the top of the podcast, like, they're not that interested in logo slaps. Of course, maybe that's like the cheapest option. They need to get something done and signed off. But I think in my experience, they're also very interested in doing really impactful things, really cool things, things that really like speak to the audience of the person they're collaborating with, or really unique activations, because gaming and esports is so creative, right? It's based on video games and based on this thing that, like, for all intents and purposes doesn't really exist. So you can get really, really playful with it and come up with really cool things together. And it seems that Mighty Jaxx is that's exactly where you guys are headed as well.
I think so. I think sorry, I was just going to say, just to give an example on that. I mean, for instance, go into the Mighty Jaxx office in Singapore. The number of like life-size statues you've got almost of some of these products with the dissected style. So you can imagine like a life-size Elmo, for instance, from Sesame Street. There's now in production, you'll have like a 1.2 meter Lewis Hamilton, Max Verstappen figures that'll be available. So from an activation point of view, and really seeing those as something that kind of pulls people in, and then acts as a talking point to people who then want to take home, their own kind of version of that at some price point maybe that is more affordable to them, is something that we're really aware of. And so we're looking to expand our presence at a lot of different events, a lot of different spaces like this, to be able to really work with creators and brands in a different way.
If you could see into the future, where do you think this sort of digital collectible space will maybe end up in, let's say, just a year's time? Because things are just keep moving faster and faster these days.
Yeah, exactly. I think every conversation you have with people is someone's kind of moving the goalposts, and you're constantly having to kind of reassess and look at things. There's almost no point having your 3 year vision or your 3 year plan because it's undoubtedly going to be wrong by in a month's time. But I think my view is it's going to kind of go full circle in that the digital element is going to be the driver of these things, and over time that will overtake the physical element. Even in the licensing industry, there's big moves in this space where you've got whole, big media groups who are like employing now NFT rights people. So it's clearly going to be a much bigger thing of how people collaborate on all of that stuff. And clearly, the ones that are like most community driven, as you mentioned earlier with Bored Ape, have really seen the best results so far. So what's going to be interesting there is like how, if any, physical items come off the back of that. And I think for us, we're still convinced there's a market for physical collectibles, or I personally am. It's such a kind of interesting area of how people interact with their passions, and I think even within a year's time, you're going to see this whole area kind of explode, and the link between digital and physical become almost inseparable.
Right. I mean, also with, when we're all locked down and we all had these just digital experiences and such, we were all really, really hungry for, physical interaction again, and being able to chat with people physically and such. So I'm with you 100% that I think that, nothing beats the real thing. Uh, and I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon.
No, I don't think so. I mean, clearly there's different kind of segments within this space. So within NFTs and within kind of collectibles per se. Obviously, you've got the kind of speculator types who just in it to try and make money quickly. But I think the true fans, the ones who are kind of looking for something that genuinely interesting, and a way to keep their own memories of the brand or their own collectibles and their own mementos in this space are going to be the ones in it for the long haul, who ultimately be the ones who be happiest with the results, because I think there'll be a lot to come over the next couple of years.
Yeah, and that also just made me think about like sports memorabilia, right? Things that have been around for a long, long time are like more valuable because they're the last remaining also, which is a very different aspect for digital things. Of course, yeah, things can get deleted, I guess, but whole point of things being on the blockchain is that they don't. So that's like a whole other aspect of having these digital things, is that they are concrete, and they can be lost. And that's, not necessarily future proofing, but that's just how things are, right?
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think one of the interesting things is where we talked earlier about like limited edition or something like that. This can go to the nth degree, where you could end up with like hyper limited edition items uh, for physical collectibles that tie into specific NFTs, almost like one of one type collectibles. That you can imagine the future value of those, if you've got the only one in the world, will be absolutely enormous for people who are really passionate about those things.
Yeah, indeed. And same with like just all old collectibles, as you're saying, right? Like original Game Boys are way more valuable nowadays than when they were retailing and such, because of all these reasons that we mentioned. Alex, where thanks so much for joining me on the show. Where can people find you if they're interested in learning more about Mighty Jaxx, and where can they find Mighty Jaxx?
So, if you visit mightyjaxx.com, then you can certainly see the array of products that we've got online there. We're currently at a stage where we're onboarding partners, be that kind of other partners to work with in the future, or kind of retail and distribution partners. So here in Europe, part of my goal at the moment is to set up the office, to set everything up and running. So you can also contact me via. Do I give my email here?
Yeah, if you want to.
Uh, okay, alex.neal at mightyjaxx.com. If anyone's got any questions or any queries, then I'm more than happy to answer. And as I say, we'll be at Las Vegas licensing show in a couple of weeks' time to meet with everyone there to try to cement our place and really bring on board more partners in this space.
Amazing.
So thanks a lot for your time, Kerry. It's been really great talking to you.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure, and really, really great to learn more about the licensing thing. As I said, I just find it so fascinating. It's such a thing that I underappreciated how complicated it was when I was younger, and wondering why I couldn't get the product or watch the show that I wanted to watch because of where I lived. But it's an incredibly complex thing.
Yeah, it sure is. Yeah.
Okay, Alex, thanks so much for coming on the show, and we'll see you around.
Okay, thanks a lot, Kerry. All the best.